Welcome to the On the Move podcast. My name is Alan Clelland. I am Vice President of the Board of Management of the City of Pasadena's Community Access Corporation, PCAC, and I'm a 25-year resident of the City of Pasadena. PCAC is the parent body of Pasadena Media, which operates the city's two community access television channels, KPAS and the Arroyo channel. I'm pleased to be the host of this, the 10th of Pasadena Media's monthly On the Move podcasts, exploring mobility issues in the City of Pasadena. Our goal is to provide information to our community on current issues of interest, present new ideas, and take an occasional look at Pasadena's history and so how we got here. This month's episode examines a key issue of maintaining mobility on the city's road network by accommodating vehicles that are not moving. Yes, parking. And I'm pleased to welcome as my guest today, Jon Hamblen, the City of Pasadena's parking manager. So, Jon, welcome to the On the Move podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. It's good to have you. As the manager of the city's department focused on parking, could we please start the chat here by you giving us an overview of the parking department, its responsibilities, staffing, and activities?
Sure. We pretty much anything that touches parking, I handle, but my team, we have roughly 6 customer service representatives that handle our frontline customer service inquiries. We have 10 enforcement staff that handle parking enforcement requests throughout the city. We also contract some of that enforcement out with a private contractor. And then we operate 8 city-owned parking facilities, garages, traditional garages, and then another 4 surface lots that the city either owns or controls.
Goodness me. And private sector involved in that as well.
Correct.
Yeah. That seems like a lot to manage. So given that background here, what are the department's goals that you aim to support as you have the role of managing it?
So it depends on where you are in the city. If you're in a business district, our primary goal is to get turnover for the districts, to get as many people to visit those business districts as we can. That'll support restaurants and retail and office space. If you're in the residential areas, we're really looking more at quality of life, people's ability to have their street cleaned, people to have a peaceful existence, improve safety, things like that.
Oh, excellent. That's a sort of prime responsibility serving the community, but also taking into account the business community as well. So what impact does the user have on your approach to parking issues?
The end driver, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Well, a lot. Parking, we like to say in the industry, it's usually the first thing and the last thing somebody does when they go to visit a business district or any area, right? And everybody does it that drives every single day. So everybody's a little bit of a parking expert just by doing what they do naturally.
Studio, yes.
So we see a lot of behaviors with people that are, we try and encourage behavior. How's that? We try and encourage behavior through policy. So for example, good behavior, of course. A perfect parking manager's world is we never write a citation and everybody's compliant. That's the dream. But what we're trying to do is encourage people to be able to find a space to park, especially in the business district, without having to circle and circle and circle and look for that either on-street space or the parking garage space. So we want that experience to be a pleasant experience for the end user.
Right.
We want, if you have a bad experience with parking, you're going to remember that. And, I use an example of the Grove. Think of the Grove over where the farmer's market is, specifically the farmer's market. There's a surface lot over there. And the last time I parked in that lot, I believe it was 2 or 3 hours you got free, and then you paid beyond that. Mm-hmm. And parking in that lot was very much, I call it a blood sport. It was every person for themselves. It was a complete battle. A lot of what we call cruising in the industry, just driving in circles looking for the spot.
Oh, I think we've all been through that. Anybody who's watching has been through that, remembers it.
100%. And free parking actually encourages that kind of behavior. Meanwhile, maybe 1,000 feet away from that is a 7 or 8 story parking structure where, yes, you pay from the get-go and you pay a premium to park there, but they have parking guidance. They'll tell you how many spaces on which floor. Right? You generally can just go in, park, get out of your car, and not deal with the headache of trying to fight for that free space. So that's what parking policy should be doing, right? Is looking at what your occupancy level is, what your traffic levels are, and then trying to determine what the right price is to not be prohibitive and not scare everybody away, but to keep spaces available so people can quickly get to their location, pay for their parking session, go conduct business, and leave and let the next person do the same thing.
Which means you have to be sensitive to the reason for them being there. You mentioned businesses again, service industries and shopping and all that. And that has an impact on what you're trying to provide.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the type of thing that you've been talking about here, as I said, the audience probably can relate to that, a bad experience that they've had, not just here, but in other cities. So do you get much benefit from sharing experiences with other cities, other parking managers, other parking departments as to what they are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my, I don't want to call it a side hustle. That's not the right phrase. I'm the president of the California Mobility and Parking Association, which is a volunteer organization. We represent anyone with public parking, predominantly municipalities, colleges, universities, airports, hospitals.
That's quite a reach.
Yeah, well, then those are all different types of parking users, right?
Right.
The airports are long-term. You're going to be there for days.
Different demands, very
correct
demands, yeah.
Hospitals, you may be a visitor, you may be a patient, so different demands yet again. There's also staff for all of those facilities that you have to consider. Where are those staff members parking? But there are similar issues, especially when you're talking municipality to municipality. So through that organization, we call it the CMPA, we talk very consistently with other municipalities to find out what they're doing, what's successful, what's not successful. Some people try things that just don't work, and we want to hear about
that. Happens, obviously. Yeah, that's good to know that.
And yeah, we want to hear those stories too. So yeah, we stay very connected. It's very important to hear what's happening in the industry and trying to find solutions that'll work here for Pasadena.
And there's not only the experience you gain from listening to other agencies in a similar position as yourself, but presumably third parties that are carrying out research, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Into new ideas, new techniques for parking and parking management. Does that come into it at all for you?
Yeah, that we'll talk to you at UCLA and their team.
Oh,
yes, occasionally.
Uh-huh.
They've done work on transportation and specifically parking. Also, we talk internationally with other countries. Europe tends to be a little bit ahead of us in terms of parking technology, parking policy. Believe it or not, Australia and New Zealand also tend to be a little bit ahead of us in terms of implementing new policies and new solutions.
So I always think of Australia having more space. Maybe New Zealand not, but
yeah,
there might be different policies there.
Yeah, I mean but still a high vehicle ownership rate and high usage. And there's some companies that are hosted in both of those countries that are trying to find solutions, just like we are in the States.
Yeah. So you mentioned UCLA there, which is interesting because key university here locally, and through ITE, when I was involved in ITE, I had quite contact with the department there, and they've had quite some influence on parking through one particular staff member.
Absolutely.
Professor Don Shoup. Yes. Did you ever meet him?
I did. I've met him, had met him more than once. The first time I met Professor Shoup, I was at a conference. And if you're in the parking world, you have to understand that Professor Shoup is a celebrity. Yes, he is a rock star, was a rock star in the industry. And I had not met him at that point and knew he was going to be there and was extremely excited. And when you meet kind of, I guess, an idol in a way, you think of the million questions you're going to ask them. So I'm thinking about it. I get on an elevator and I look up, and into the elevator walks Professor Shoup. So, and this is right when I get to the conference. So, 8 million words that I was going to say to the man go completely out of your head completely. And I'm able to muster up a good morning, how are you? And he says, I'm well, thank you very much. Yourself? I'm well, thank you much. And we get to our floor and he leaves, and that was it. And I was a little bit crestfallen at the end of that interaction, but fortunately had the opportunity to meet with him several times since.
Oh, yes. Yeah. He was such a nice guy. Yeah.
Oh, John.
And the impact that he had is so stunning, isn't it? And it's this whole identifying this concept of a sweet spot in pricing.
They call it the Goldilocks price, to where it wasn't too high and it wasn't too low, and it kept 85% occupancy though. So basically, there was one parking space per block face that will be available for somebody coming in to park to then go and spend money in a business district, and that was his kind of vision, if you will. And he did a lot of work, a lot of research and a lot of writing. He's a very prolific writer, and used Old Pasadena specifically as an example in a lot of his work.
Yeah.
He talked about the bids and the meter monies. Essentially, the meter money would go back to be used in the area where it was collected and was used to make improvements.
Which in itself was innovative at the time.
100%. And that was his idea of trying to get a business community that might be a little more reluctant and a little scared of paid parking when they hadn't had it before, to get them a little more invested to want to do it. And it's worked. I mean, if you see the scramble crosswalks in Old Pasadena, for example, there's 3 over there now, I believe it is. And those were funded, those are funded by Meter Fund.
Yeah, and probably lots of the audience is aware of this, the scramble where you can cross not only you're still crossings, but any which way.
Diagonally as well.
Yeah, which are interesting in themselves. Yeah, I always thought of him as making this more aware. You know, it's one thing to talk about demand. Oh, we got this demand for the parking. But looking at how the occupancy of the spaces changed during the day.
Absolutely.
And adapting to that as well, which brought in a completely different variable in. And obviously was making it tremendously successful.
Yes.
Are there any other techniques that come into play here? We think of different zones for parking, don't we? That type of thing that come into play in terms of determining pricing.
Yeah. So one of the things we're working on right now is implementing paid parking in the Playhouse District.
Oh, there you go.
So that's been to City Council. It's been approved, and that's involving a new pricing model for parking. We're doing a couple of different things there. One thing is we're looking at occupancy over time and helping that determine what the parking rates should be.
Right.
So we're looking at a baseline rate to start with. We haven't determined what that's going to be yet, but it'll be on the lower end. Council's approved what we call guardrails. So at a minimum, $1 an hour, at a maximum, $5 an hour. And we'll start very, very much closer to the $1 an hour rate. And then we're going to look at occupancy over time and then adjust that rate in 25-cent increments over time, probably once, maybe twice a year. The other thing we're doing is we've already done occupancy studies, and we've determined that there's an inner core there at Playhouse, really from Union Street to Green Street, Colorado, that kind of core of that district, much more heavily occupied than some of the outer streets that we're looking at metering as well. So we would price that core a little bit higher to start, and then let the price and the occupancy kind of determine where that rate falls to ultimately find what we're looking for, which is that sweet spot to where somebody can come in, park, do their business, get out, and let the next person come in.
I mentioned zones, and you just brought that zone approach in there as well. There's something else I came across called block face. Is that a technique, or is that just a characteristic of buildings that are...
Some cities will do block face by block face pricing, where they'll look at their occupancy per block face.
Oh.
So City of Los Angeles does this, where you may have a block face that's $5 an hour in Los Angeles, and that's the east-west block face. And then right around the corner in that northwest or the north-south block face, it might be $2 an hour, because for whatever reason,
just going around the corners,
it's just not as occupied as that main street. You can see that a little bit on heavily utilized corridor streets.
Right.
And then some less utilized
side streets.
Yeah, that I might have to, now I got to pull off. And then to get back on that main street, I got to loop around. And So people do try and use as a main street. So you'll see it
as much as they possibly can.
I'm not a big fan because it's harder to communicate that to the end user to know. They're not going to know until they get out of their car and look at the meter how much that's going to cost. I'm not as big of a fan of that.
There's two aspects of this, of course. You're talking about the user, but the user's there for a reason, to visit a business or shop or whatever. So you should really be taking into account as well the businesses and their services that are there. How do you engage? Yeah, I take it you do engage them. And how do you engage them?
Yeah, for something like new metered parking, we will go to the businesses and communicate what's happening, or a change in rates or a change in the way we're doing things. Another area that's been approved by council for this new model is South Lake. So that's something we'll be rolling out in the next few months, going door to door, knocking, saying hi to the managers, owners, explaining what we're doing, walking them through the whole process. We also work closely with our traffic engineering team because
in the
DOT, they're the ones who determine length of stay, whatever the curb restriction is. They're the ones that'll determine that. And they're very helpful in that, hey, this is a dry cleaner. A dry cleaner does not need 4-hour parking, right? A dry cleaner needs 15-minute parking, maybe 30, but no more than that. Well, that's a completely different need than a restaurant. That's a completely different need than a hair salon, a dentist office, right? Those all have different needs. So they're very good at kind of looking at a block face and saying, okay, maybe a space here for 15, maybe 2, maybe the rest will be up to a certain time limit. And then if metered, we'll apply metered rates on top of those time limits.
Now, that's a lot of work for you to identify individual businesses and locations and all that. And are there associations out there that help with the communications to talk to a business association of some form?
Yeah, well, we will talk to this association. So like, for example, in Old Pasadena, if we were to make a big change, we would work with the Old Pasadena Management District to do outreach to all the businesses there. Playhouse will be working with Playhouse District. It's Brian Wallace over the Playhouse District. Will be working with Brian and his team to help get the word out over what we're trying to do. Gina Talil over at South Lake, and the SLBA there. There's also vendors that will use contractors to come in and help us message, help us do. We did some outreach with a parking strategic plan that we worked on, and that was a whole soup to nuts, wall to wall review of our parking program. Everything from residential permits to meters to you name it. We had a company called Dixon Resources come in and do a full review of our program, and then they came back with a whole book full of recommendations for our program, and they also helped with outreach. So they'll go with us to meet with these business districts. They'll go do knocks and talks with the different businesses.
So that analysis that the firm Dixon has carried out, is that already being published?
It is done. It is on our website, on the parking website.
Oh.
You go to cityofpasadena.net, find the transportation department. You'll see the parking section, and then it's in the document section there. You can see the parking strategic.
And you mentioned the parking strategic plan. Is it part of the parking strategic plan, or that's a separate?
Is what part of
the analysis that the consultant carried out?
You will definitely see analysis that was done.
That's influenced the strategic plan.
100%.
Future, yeah.
Correct. And it tends to be more broad recommendations, right? Like one of the recommendations is improve your technology, because we had so imagine parking in Old Pasadena. Maybe you're not on Colorado, you're on one of the side streets or Green, and it's all single space, the old single space meters that don't take credit cards. So we knew we needed
more extreme,
right? We knew we needed to upgrade technology, but that's one of the things they're talking about.
Yeah.
So we're actually actively replacing those right now with multi-space meters that are updated, that are brand new, touchscreen, state of the art.
Yeah.
And a much simpler, also the other benefit, it's a much simpler experience for our end users.
Yeah. When I came to visit you last week and I park outside the city hall, I was stunned by how easy it was to find parking. There were parking spaces right by City Hall, and that little screen, and you just type your license plate in, and away you go, you're done.
You pay by plate, you don't need to print out a receipt anymore and put it on your dashboard.
Right.
So you go to the machine, go back to your car,
come back.
And again, those little friction points we're trying to eliminate and trying to make life just a little bit easier and a little bit better of an experience for our end users, so they're going to come back.
Yeah, that's all. Again, we're back to that end user experience. Yes, and but I'm glad we got the chance to mention UCLA and Professor Shoup, because sadly he passed away a couple of months ago. But too, you can't underestimate the impact he had on this whole area that we're talking about.
No, you can't. And we'll continue to have.
And we'll continue to have, even as we go into the future. And looking into the future, you say that there's this new strategic plan. So what any new developments that it should be interesting for the public to be aware of that could be happening within the city?
Yeah, I reference most of them. One of them is the demand-based rates and it's not demand-based in the, not an example like tolling, right? We all know the tolling of the express lanes, right? Where, you have the sign, I can look up, I can say, hey, it's $5 if I want to take the express lane right now. And then maybe the guy behind me, 2 miles down the road sees it at $7.50 now. Because a lot of us take that. We're not talking that kind of, minute by minute fluctuation.
Very dynamic.
Right. We're not talking that, but we are talking about looking at occupancy over time and saying, okay, we're oversubscribed. It's very difficult to find parking in this section, in this area. So we're going to go ahead and bump the rates up. That's progressive. That's not done in a lot of places, but Los Angeles does it. San Francisco does it. Portland, some bigger cities, some mid-sized cities. And it's something that we think is going to help us keep that space open for people to have a better experience. And then there'll always be the garages in Old Pasadena, surface lots and other areas for people to park if they don't want that experience, or they're going to be there for a longer amount of time.
So getting back to the user experience, you want to avoid the frustration of, I was here last week and I only paid such and such for it, right at the same time, or whatever. So communication with the community is important, so they understand that these prices can change, but it's beneficial because it's keeping the spaces, the occupancy available for you.
Absolutely.
Make it easier to park.
And the other reminder is prices can also go down in this model. So if something is undersubscribed and we're seeing, 50% occupancy,
yes,
why would we raise the rates there? We need to look at the rates. And if it is a higher rate, we need to lower it because, supply and demand, right? If the demand's not there, then we need to try and get demand to come.
Right. So that outreach to the community is very important.
Yes.
Yes. How would you be doing that in the future?
So there'll be an annual parking study that we do. And that's a part of the rate setting policy. It's spelled out in the parking strategic plan, actually, to where we will do an annual rate report. We'll make recommendations out of that rate report, and then we'll implement those recommendations.
Yeah, excellent. We've been talking about you parking to go and visit a business or do some shopping. There's the other parking that gets done on a daily basis, right? Where you want to just park conveniently, cheaply for a long period of time, and maybe all day. And to get to somewhere else, you need to get on some form of other transport. All right?
Yes.
And this is the concept as a mobility hub?
Yes. Yeah, very much so, right? So a mobility hub is you park at a location and then you have multiple options. You could take a bus, you can take maybe light rail, maybe it's a bike sharing program.
Oh.
Maybe it's your own bicycle that you bring with you, and maybe there's lockers there for you to store the bicycle. There's multiple ways. It could be, it's called shared mobility, right? It could be scooters, which we don't have in Pasadena currently. But it's looking at a bunch of different modes for people to be able to get from point A to point B. And this is that intermediary stop, so to speak.
Right.
From home to this mobility hub to then get me to the next location. You'll hear a lot of folks say first mile, last mile, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And essentially that's that last part of the trip that I want to make, and it's just maybe cheaper and easier, more convenient for me to park at this mobility hub to get to my next destination.
Yes, yeah.
Or
if you've got that alternative form of transportation to pick up on.
Yes.
I'm sure there's some of the audience listening say that, thank goodness we don't have scooters, because I've been through that in somewhere like Santa Monica where they just lying all over that place. Yeah.
That part of our industry has cleaned up a lot.
Oh, it has?
It was
improved?
It was Wild West, just pre-pandemic. Oh, my goodness. When you went to a city that had them, they were everywhere. And you're right, they were laying in, parking spaces, disabled spaces, blocking curb access, sidewalks, and cities have done a good job, I think, reining in these companies to say, hey, look, if you're going to operate in our city, you have to play by these sets of rules.
Right.
And they actually have staff now that go around and find scooters in places they're not supposed to be. They'll relocate them to areas.
It's changed a lot.
So it's changed.
Something big about, like, yeah. This is a very dynamic area of transportation, isn't it?
Parking is very dynamic. I think the biggest challenge we have is managing all the different layers of demand that we have at the curb. And
oh, yes, that's the other one, because as we look into the future, I mean, there's enough demand for the curb now for delivery services and that sort of thing, which tend to be staffed.
yes,
The drivers, they have drivers, but in the future, we're looking at autonomous vehicles, robo taxis, autonomous vehicles for delivery, which are happening now.
yeah,
And they expect to be able to find some curb space,
yes,
as well.
yeah. I tell people that don't quite have their brain wrapped around, they just think, okay, I park, whatever. But you're fighting for that curb space as a traditional parker with the food delivery companies, with the uniform delivery companies, with the beverage distributors, with Uber and Lyft, with the occasional taxi, although I haven't seen a taxi other than at an airport in a long, long time. But also DoorDash, Grubhub.
They're all good examples of
gig
driver for the curb space.
And they're all fighting for that same space. And now we're going to add this layer of autonomous vehicles that these robo-taxis that are going to want somewhere to load and unload. It should not be in the middle of the street. And you've seen Ubers and Lyfts. You may have been in an Uber or Lyft that dropped you off in the middle of the street. Not the safest thing. So we want pedestrian safety. So that needs to happen at the curb, as does all this other behavior. And then these robo-taxis, there's going to be peaks for demand, and then there's going to be,
And they're coming.
and then there's going to be these kind of ebbs in demand. Well, where do they go when the demand isn't there? And that's something else the parking world needs to be thinking about. They're still vehicles.
Is it that we bought somewhere?
They still have to park. Hopefully they're electric. They're going to have to maybe charge. So it kind of changes the idea of what a parking garage and structure looks like. And it really
There's a lot to think
Yeah.
about there in the future. And this is certainly the robo taxis. They're coming. They're on the west side at the moment. They are, and they're coming across to the east. So there we go. Well, John, I'd like to thank you very, very much for joining me today. This has been fascinating. This whole area of stationary vehicles can be so interesting. I'd also like to thank the audience for tuning into this episode. And I'd encourage you to look at future episodes of On the Move. Thank you very, very much. Thanks again, John.
Thanks for having me.